The wagon rattled into St. Joe, Missouri on a scorching August afternoon in 1867, carrying a woman in chains who would change everything about Isaac Flint's carefully isolated life. Katerina Morgan sat with her back straight despite the iron manacles cutting into her wrists, her dark auburn hair matted with road dust, and her green eyes fixed somewhere beyond the growing crowd of townspeople gathering to gawk at her. The marshal driving the wagon looked uncomfortable, constantly adjusting his collar and avoiding eye contact with his prisoner, while the deputy beside him clutched a Bible like it might ward off evil spirits. Isaac had come down from his mountain cabin for supplies, a rare trip he made only when absolutely necessary. He preferred the company of pine trees and creek water to people, had for the 7 years since he left the war behind. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with broad shoulders hardened by years of chopping wood and hauling pelts, he cut an imposing figure even among the rough frontier men of St. Joe. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his sun-weathered face bore the kind of hard lines that came from choosing solitude over society. He was loading salt and coffee into his saddlebags when the wagon rolled past, and something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the woman held herself, proud despite the obvious abuse she had endured. Maybe it was the purple bruise on her cheekbone or the dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Or maybe it was something he could not name, a pull in his chest that felt like recognition even though he had never seen her before in his life. "Witch!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Burn her before she curses us all." The marshal held up his hand. "Now hold on, folks. That is for a proper trial to determine. We are civilized people, not a mob." "Civilized," a woman in a faded calico dress pushed forward. "My husband is dead because of her." She looked at him with those devil eyes, and 2 days later he dropped dead in the fields. "Your husband had a weak heart, Martha," the marshal said wearily, like they had been over this many times already. "The doctor said so. She made it weak." With her curses and hexes, Katerina finally spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. "I tried to help him. I gave him willow bark tea for the pain in his chest. That is all I did." "She admits it," Martha shrieked. "She gave him a potion." The crowd surged forward, and Isaac found himself moving before he consciously decided to. He stepped into the space between the wagon and the mob, his massive frame enough to make most of them pause. The marshal looked at him with something between relief and wariness. "Isaac Flint," the lawman said, "did not expect to see you down from your mountain. Needed supplies." Isaac's voice was deep and rough from disuse. He gestured at the crowd with one calloused hand. "This does not look like justice." "We will have a proper trial," the marshal insisted. "Judge Winters is due through next week. She will curse us all by then," someone yelled. Isaac turned to look at the crowd, his dark eyes moving slowly from face to face. Most of them dropped their gazes, unwilling to meet the intensity of his stare. There was something wild about Isaac Flint, something that reminded people that civilization was just a thin veneer over the brutal reality of survival. He had fought in the war, then disappeared into the Ozark Mountains for years. Rumors said he had gone half feral up there, that he could track a man for 100 miles and shoot the eye out of a hawk in flight. Looking at him now, the crowd remembered those rumors. "Then lock her up proper," Isaac said. "But if I hear about a lynching, I will remember every face I see here today." It was not an idle threat, and everyone knew it. The crowd began to disperse, muttering and casting dark looks back at the wagon, but they moved away. The marshal exhaled slowly. "Appreciate that, Flint. Though I do not know what stake you have in this." Isaac did not know either. He looked up at Katerina and found her staring at him with an expression he could not read. Up close, he could see she was younger than he first thought, maybe 25 to his 32 years. Despite the dirt and bruises, there was a striking quality to her features, a sharp intelligence in those green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "No stake," he said finally. "Just do not hold with mob justice." "Well, she will get a fair trial," the marshal said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. "Come on, let's get her locked up." Isaac watched as they drove the wagon toward the small jailhouse at the end of the main street. He should have gone back to his supplies, should have finished his business and headed back to the mountain before nightfall. Instead, he found himself following at a distance, unable to shake the strange feeling that had settled in his chest the moment he laid eyes on Katerina Morgan. The jailhouse was a simple wooden structure with 2 cells and an office where the marshal kept a desk and a cot for overnight duty. Isaac waited outside until the marshal emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What are the actual charges?" Isaac asked. The marshal sighed and sat on the bench outside the door. "Started 3 towns west of here. She came through offering healing services, herbs and tinctures and such. Helped a few people, from what I gather. Then old Thomas Bennett died after she treated him for chest pains. His widow started saying it was witchcraft, got people riled up. A few other things got blamed on her, the usual superstitious nonsense. Cow went dry, child took sick, crops failed in one field. All her fault, they said. Any proof? Proof." The marshal laughed bitterly. "You know how it is with witch accusations. Proof does not matter much when people get scared. But between you and me, I think she is just an unlucky healer who was in the wrong place when bad things happened. Probably should have kept moving instead of staying in one spot long enough for them to paint her as a scapegoat. So why bring her here for trial instead of letting them handle it back where it happened? Because back there, she would already be hanging from a tree." The marshal met Isaac's eyes. "I might not believe in witches, but I believe in the law. She deserves a trial at least." Isaac respected that, even if he suspected the outcome would be the same regardless of the evidence. Fear made people cruel, and he had seen enough of that in the war to last a lifetime. He nodded slowly. "I want to talk to her." "Why? Good question." Isaac did not have a good answer, just that persistent pull in his chest that would not let him walk away. "Just do." The marshal studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral if she curses you. 5 minutes." The cell was dim and hot, the afternoon sun beating down on the wooden roof. Katerina sat on the narrow cot with her manacled hands in her lap, staring at the wall. She did not look up when the marshal opened the barred door to let Isaac in. 5 minutes, the marshal repeated, then left them alone. Isaac stood just inside the cell, suddenly unsure what he had wanted to say. Katerina finally looked at him, her expression guarded. "Come to see the witch up close?" she asked. "Want to see if I have horns under my hair or a tail hidden in my skirts?" "No." He moved closer but kept a respectful distance. "Came to see if you needed help." That surprised her. Her eyes widened slightly and some of the defensive hardness in her face softened. "Why would you help me? Already told you, do not hold with mob justice. You do not even know me. I could be guilty of everything they say." "Are you?" she laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Would you believe me if I said no? Might." Katerina was quiet for a moment, studying him with those sharp green eyes. "What is your name?" "Isaac Flint. The Mountain Man." She nodded slowly. "I heard people talking about you while they were deciding whether to hang me or wait for the marshal. They say you disappeared into the mountains years ago, that you can kill a man with your bare hands, that you are half wild. People say a lot of things. They say you have magic too," she continued, watching his reaction carefully. "That you can track anything, find anyone, survive things that would kill other men. They say the mountain blessed you somehow." Isaac felt something cold run down his spine. That is just skill and experience, is it? She leaned forward slightly. I can see it on you, like a shimmer in the air around your shoulders, golden like sunlight through honey. I have always been able to see these things, even as a child. My grandmother could too. She called it reading a person's light. He should have left then. Should have walked away from the crazy talk and forgotten about the woman in chains. But he did not. What does it mean? It means you have power, whether you acknowledge it or not. Real power, not the superstitious nonsense those people believe in. You are connected to this land in a way most people never are. The mountain did not bless you. You and it recognized each other as kin. Isaac's hands clenched at his sides. He had never told anyone about the feeling he got sometimes in the high places, the sense that the mountain was aware of him, watching over him. The way animals did not run from him like they did from other hunters, how he could feel where water ran underground or where a storm would break hours before it hit. He had convinced himself it was just instinct, just the result of years of isolation and observation. That is why I knew I had to talk to you, Katerina said softly, because you have my kind of magic, even if you call it something else. I do not have magic. Then how did you know to help me? She tilted her head. Out of all those people, you were the only one who stepped forward. Why? He could not answer that because he did not understand it himself. That pull in his chest, that sense of recognition, it defied explanation. And that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. I heal people, Katerina said when he remained silent. That is what I do. My grandmother taught me about herbs and remedies, how to set bones and birth babies and ease pain. But I can also see things others cannot. I know when a sickness is in the body before it shows symptoms. I know which plants will help and which will harm. And yes, sometimes I just know things I should not be able to know. That scares people. With good reason. If you are seeing things that are not there, poking at forces you do not understand. I understand perfectly. Her voice turned hard. I understand that people would rather blame a woman for their troubles than accept that bad things sometimes just happen. I understand that having knowledge and skill makes you dangerous in their eyes. I understand that I will probably hang for the crime of being different, of being able to do things they cannot explain. The marshal seems like a fair man. Maybe the judge will be too. Maybe. She did not sound convinced. Or maybe I will die here in Missouri, far from my home, because I tried to help people. Isaac wanted to tell her it would be fine, that justice would prevail, but he had seen too much of the world to believe that anymore. Sometimes good people died for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The war had taught him that lesson over and over until it carved itself into his bones. Where is home? He asked instead. Was Virginia. My grandmother and I lived in the mountains there, far from towns. She died 2 years ago and I could not stay in that cabin alone with all her memories. So I headed west, thinking maybe I could make a life helping people in the frontier towns where healers are scarce. Stupid dream. Not stupid. Just harder than you thought. She looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, and he felt that pull in his chest intensify. It was like a rope stretched between them, invisible but undeniable. He had never felt anything like it before, and it unsettled him deeply. Time is up, the marshal called from outside the cell. Isaac stepped toward the door, then paused. I will be at the trial. Speak as a witness if it helps. Why? Katerina asked again. You do not owe me anything. He looked back at her, at the way the dim light caught in her auburn hair and the defiant tilt of her chin, despite everything she faced. Maybe I owe it to myself. That night, Isaac made camp outside of town instead of staying at the boarding house like he usually did on his rare visits. He built a small fire and sat staring into the flames, trying to understand what had happened to him. He had spent 7 years avoiding attachments, avoiding people in general. After the things he had done in the war, the men he had killed, he had wanted only solitude and silence. The mountain had given him that, had let him heal in his own way. But now this woman had appeared, and suddenly all that carefully constructed peace felt fragile. He could still see her face, still hear her voice saying he had magic. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as the desperate ravings of a woman facing death. Another part, the part that woke before dawn knowing exactly where the deer would come to drink, the part that could feel storms forming a day away, that part recognized truth when he heard it. He had always known he was different. Even before the war, he could track better than anyone, shoot straighter, survive longer in harsh conditions. His father had called it natural talent. His commanding officers in the war had called it an invaluable asset. But Isaac had known, deep in his gut, that it was something more, something he could not explain and therefore tried not to think about, and now Katerina had looked at him and named it. Magic. Real, undeniable magic. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up toward the star-filled sky. Isaac pulled his bedroll closer to the flames and tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to the woman in the cell, to the golden shimmer she claimed to see around him, to the way his heart had kicked in his chest when their eyes met. He barely knew her. She was a stranger who might very well hang in a week when the judge arrived. Getting involved was foolish, dangerous even. But Isaac Flint had never been particularly good at doing the sensible thing, and he could not shake the certainty that he was meant to help her. That maybe, somehow, she was meant to find him. The next morning, Isaac went back to the jailhouse. The marshal was drinking coffee on the front step, looking tired. "She is still alive if you are checking," the lawman said. "Though I had to run off a couple of hotheads around midnight who wanted to take justice into their own hands. Word is spreading. People are coming in from the surrounding farms to see the witch. You going to be able to keep her safe until the trial?" "Hope so." "I sent word to the territorial marshal asking for backup, but who knows if he will come." He looked up at Isaac. "You planning to stick around?" "For a few days. Might help if you made yourself visible. People are still spooked by you from yesterday. You standing guard would probably discourage the more cowardly ones from trying anything." Isaac nodded slowly. He had not planned to stay in town, hated the crowds and noise and the way people looked at him. But the thought of heading back up the mountain while Katerina sat alone in that cell made his chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. "I will stay close," he said. Over the next 3 days, Isaac became a semi-permanent fixture outside the jailhouse. He sat on the bench or stood leaning against the wall, his rifle always within reach, his eyes constantly scanning the street. Word spread quickly that the mountain man was protecting the witch, which created all sorts of new rumors. Some said she had bewitched him, others that he was in league with the devil too. Isaac ignored all of it, focused only on the task he had set himself. The marshal let him visit Katerina twice a day, morning and evening. They talked cautiously at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her grandmother, about learning the healing arts in the Virginia mountains, about the loneliness after the old woman died, the desperate need to be around people again, even though she had never quite fit in anywhere. Isaac found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud. About the war, the killing that had left dark stains on his soul. About running to the mountain to escape himself as much as society. About the strange connection he felt to the wilderness, the way he could sense things he should not be able to sense. "That is your gift," Katerina said, sitting cross-legged on the cot with her manacles resting in her lap. "Everyone has one in theory. but most people have it so suppressed by fear and social conditioning that they never access it. You lived alone long enough for yours to awaken fully. Or I just learned to pay attention to things most people ignore. If that is what you need to believe, she smiled slightly. But you know it is more. You have always known. He did know, even if he had spent years denying it. Sitting here talking to her made it impossible to keep pretending. She saw too clearly, understood too deeply. If you have this gift, Isaac said carefully, can you not use it to escape? Break the manacles, slip away, Katerina laughed softly. That is not how it works. I can see patterns, read the body's light, know things intuitively. But I cannot make iron break or doors open by wishing it. My grandmother always said our magic was subtle, the kind that works with nature rather than against it. Flashy miracles were never our way. Still seems unfair. All this power and you are trapped in a cell. Power is not the same as freedom. She looked down at her hands. I could have walked away from that town where Thomas Bennett died, could have kept moving and never let them catch me. But I stayed to help his widow understand it was not my fault. Tried to explain about his weak heart, make her see reason. That was my mistake. I thought truth mattered more than fear. It should matter more. But it doesn't. And here I am. That evening, Isaac sat outside the jailhouse watching the sun set over the Missouri River in the distance. The marshal came out and sat beside him, offering a flask of whiskey. Isaac took a small swallow and handed it back. Judge Winters sent word, the marshal said. He will be here day after tomorrow. Trial will be the next morning. That fast. He wants this over with quick. Bad for business, having a witch trial drag out, scares off travelers and traders. The marshal took a long drink. For what it is worth, I am going to speak for her. Tell the judge everything I saw and heard, but the people from that other town they are sending witnesses to, and they are angry. She deserves a fair hearing. What she deserves and what she will get might be two different things. The marshal looked at him. You have feelings for her. Isaac stiffened. Known her less than a week. Time does not always matter. Sometimes you just know. The lawman stood and stretched. Just be prepared for how this might end. And watch yourself. If they convict her, they might turn on anyone they think is associated with her. After the marshal went back inside, Isaac sat in the gathering darkness and faced what he had been avoiding since the moment he laid eyes on Katerina Morgan. Yes, he had feelings for her. Feelings that went deeper and faster than made any sense. It was like she had reached into his chest and wrapped herself around his heart before he could defend against it. He wanted to protect her, not just from the mob, but from everything. Wanted to take her up to his mountain cabin and show her the places where the mist gathered at dawn, where the eagles nested, where the wildflowers bloomed in such profusion that the meadows looked painted. Wanted to hear her voice every morning and see her face every night. Wanted things he had convinced himself he would never want again. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next day, the prosecution witnesses arrived. 3 people from the town where Thomas Bennett had died, including his widow Martha. They eyed Isaac with suspicion and hostility but kept their distance, deterred by his size and the cold look in his eyes. Isaac visited Katerina that afternoon and found her pale, her hands trembling slightly. They are here, she said. I could feel them arrive, their hatred like a storm coming over the mountains. Do not let them see you afraid. Too late for that. She looked up at him with haunted eyes. I am terrified, Isaac. I do not want to die. I am only 26 years old. I had plans, dreams. I wanted to help people, maybe have a family someday. Normal things. He crossed the cell in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her manacled hands in his. The touch sent a jolt through him, that same recognition he had felt from the beginning intensifying until it was almost painful. "You are not going to die," he said fiercely. "I won't let that happen. You cannot stop a judge's verdict. I can stop an execution." Katerina stared at him, her green eyes wide. "You would do that? Break the law, become an outlaw for me?" "Yes." The simple certainty in his voice seemed to shake her. A tear slipped down her cheek and he reached up to brush it away with his thumb, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because you were right," he said. "About the magic. You have mine and I have yours. I felt it the moment I saw you, like something in me recognized something in you, like we were meant to find each other." "That is not how magic works." "Maybe it is exactly how it works." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Maybe that is the real magic, not parlor tricks or curses, just two people who see each other clearly and know they belong together." She made a small sound, half laugh and half sob, and then she was kissing him. Her manacled hands came up to rest against his chest as his arms went around her, careful of her bruises. The kiss was soft and desperate at the same time, full of fear and hope and something deeper that neither of them had words for. When they broke apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers and made a silent promise. Whatever happened at that trial, Katerina Morgan would not hang, even if he had to burn St. Joe to the ground to prevent it. The judge arrived the next morning, a heavy-set man in his 50s with impressive mutton chops and an air of weary authority. The trial was set for the following dawn in the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone who wanted to attend. Isaac barely slept that night. He checked his rifle 3 times, made sure his knife was sharp, counted the ammunition in his saddlebags. If things went wrong, he would have to move fast. Get Katerina out of the jailhouse onto a horse and into the mountains before the mob could organize. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but he had survived worse odds during the war. The church bell rang at sunrise, calling everyone to the trial. Isaac arrived early and positioned himself near the front, where he could see everything. The marshal led Katerina in through a side door, and Isaac's heart clenched at the sight of her. Someone had let her wash and provided a clean dress, but she still looked fragile and scared. Their eyes met across the crowded church, and he tried to communicate everything he was feeling in that look. "Trust me. I will get you out of this." The judge took his position at the front and called for order. The church fell silent. Dozens of faces turned expectantly toward the proceedings. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if charges of witchcraft should be brought against Katerina Morgan," Judge Winters began. "We will hear testimony from witnesses. Then I will make a ruling. This is not a full trial, but the decision made here will determine if one is necessary." The prosecution went first. Martha Bennett took the stand and recounted her version of events through tears and occasional theatrical sobs. She described how Katerina had come to their town offering healing services, how her husband had complained of chest pains, and Katerina had given him tea. 2 days later he was dead, Martha declared. She poisoned him with her devil's brew. "Did anyone else drink this tea?" the judge asked. "No, she made it special for him." "And did the doctor examine your husband?" Martha hesitated. "Yes, but the doctor was a fool. Said Thomas had a weak heart, that it could have given out any time. So a medical professional determined the cause of death was natural. But it was not natural. She cursed him." Judge Winters made some notes. "What evidence do you have of a curse?" She looked at him with those evil eyes. "And she knew he would die, I am sure of it. She had that knowing look like she could see things." The other witnesses offered similar testimonies, full of supposition and fear but light on actual evidence. One man claimed Katerina had looked at his cow before it stopped giving milk. A woman insisted that Katerina had predicted her daughter's fever, which proved she had caused it through magic. Isaac listened to all of it with growing anger. These people were inventing crimes to explain natural misfortunes, turning a healer into a scapegoat for their own bad luck and fear of the unknown. Finally, it was the defense's turn. The marshal spoke first, explaining how he had investigated the claims and found no actual evidence of wrongdoing. Then he called Isaac to testify. Isaac stood and walked to the front of the church, feeling the weight of dozens of hostile stares. The judge looked at him with interest. "State your name for the record." "Isaac Flint." "And what is your connection to the accused?" "No connection. I was in town for supplies when they brought her in. I saw the mob forming and stepped in to prevent a lynching." "Why would you do that?" Isaac looked at Katerina, then back at the judge. "Because mob justice is not justice at all. And because I have seen enough innocent people die to know that fear makes people cruel." "Do you believe she is innocent?" "I do." "On what basis?" Isaac chose his words carefully. "I spent time talking to her. She is a healer, nothing more. She knows herbs and remedies, things her grandmother taught her. That is not witchcraft, that is knowledge. And if we start calling knowledge evil, what does that say about us?" A murmur ran through the crowd, some agreeing, most disapproving. The judge held up his hand for silence. "Do you believe in witchcraft, Mr. Flint?" It was a trap of a question. Say yes, and he would be admitting dark forces existed. Say no, and he would be dismissing the prosecution's entire case. Isaac met the judge's eyes steadily. "I believe in things beyond our understanding. The world is stranger and more complex than most people acknowledge. But I also believe that calling something magic does not make it evil. There are people with gifts, with abilities that go beyond the normal. That does not make them servants of the devil. It just makes them different." "And you think Miss Morgan is one of these people with gifts?" "I know she is." The crowd erupted in noise, people shouting about devil worship and dark powers. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "You are aware that is essentially an admission of witchcraft?" Judge Winters said, "No, sir. It is an admission that she has skills and knowledge others do not. Same as a gifted blacksmith or a talented musician. We do not burn people for being good at their craft, even if that craft involves seeing things that are not there and predicting deaths." She did not predict deaths. She recognized symptoms of illness that would lead to death. That is what healers do. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying Isaac with sharp eyes. Then he called Katerina to speak. She stood, her manacled hands folded in front of her, and faced the judge with more courage than Isaac would have thought possible given how terrified she had been the day before. "Miss Morgan, did you give Thomas Bennett tea made from willow bark?" "I did," Katerina said clearly. "He complained of pains in his chest and left arm. Those are signs of heart distress. Willow bark helps with pain and can reduce strain on the heart. It was a standard treatment." "Did you tell him he would die?" "No. I told him he should see a doctor if the pains continued, that he might have a serious condition that needed more than herbal treatment." "Did you curse him or perform any rituals over him?" "No. I prayed for his health, same as any Christian would." "The witnesses claim you have unholy powers, that you can see things others cannot." Katerina lifted her chin. "I can read people well, see signs of illness in their bearing and color. My grandmother taught me to observe carefully. That is not unholy, it is just training and natural intuition." "But you admit to having intuition beyond the normal." She paused, and Isaac held his breath. This was the moment where she could damn herself or save herself. If she admitted to her true abilities, the crowd would see it as proof of witchcraft. If she denied them, she would be lying, and Isaac suspected the judge would see through it. I have gifts, Katerina said finally. I see patterns others miss. I sense things about people's health and well-being. My grandmother had the same gifts and her grandmother before her. It runs in our blood like blue eyes or red hair. It is just part of who we are. And you do not consider this evil, no more than having good eyesight or a strong memory is evil. It is just how I am made. The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The question before this court is whether these admitted abilities constitute witchcraft as defined under territorial law. Do your gifts come from unholy sources? Do they cause harm to others? That is what I must determine. He looked at Martha Bennett. You claim your husband died because of Miss Morgan's actions, but you also testified that a doctor examined him and found natural causes. Which is it? The doctor was wrong, Martha insisted. Or perhaps you are looking for someone to blame because you cannot accept that sometimes people die through no fault of anyone. The judge's voice was not unkind, but firm. Grief makes us want answers, makes us want someone to be responsible. But illness and death are part of life, not evidence of curses. He turned back to Katerina. I find no evidence of actual witchcraft here, no proof of devil worship, no ritualistic behavior, no deliberate harm. What I see is a woman with skills in healing who had the misfortune of treating people who were already gravely ill. That is not a crime. The crowd erupted again, angry voices shouting about injustice and protecting the innocent. But the judge kept speaking, his voice rising to be heard. However, I also recognize that there is genuine fear in this community about things they do not understand. Therefore, I am ordering that Katerina Morgan be released from custody, but banned from practicing healing within a 50-mile radius of St. Joe for a period of 1 year. She is to leave this area within 24 hours and not return during that time. If she abides by these terms, the charges are dropped. It was a compromise, Isaac realized. Not the complete exoneration Katerina deserved, but freedom nonetheless. He looked at her and saw the same realization dawning on her face, along with overwhelming relief. This hearing is concluded, Judge Winters said, banging his gavel one final time. The crowd was not happy, with several people loudly protesting the decision. But the judge was already gathering his papers, clearly done with the whole affair. The marshal moved to release Katerina from her manacles, and Isaac pushed through the crowd to reach her side. Their hands found each other automatically, fingers intertwining, and that electric connection flowed between them stronger than ever. She was free, banished but free. Come with me, Isaac said urgently. Up to the mountain. You will be safe there. I barely know you, Katerina said, but there was no conviction in it. They both knew it was a token protest. You know me better than anyone has in 7 years, and I know you. This is real, whatever this is between us. She looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes. It is real. They had to move fast. The crowd was still angry, still looking for a target for their fear and frustration. Isaac took Katerina to the general store where he had his supplies and bought her clothing suitable for mountain life. Then they went to the stable for horses, Isaac paying double to ensure they got good mounts. Within 3 hours of the judge's ruling, they were riding north out of St. Joe, leaving the Missouri River Valley behind and heading toward the Ozark foothills. Katerina sat her horse well despite having been in a cell for days, and Isaac felt a fierce pride watching her adapt to the situation so quickly. They rode hard for several hours, putting distance between themselves and the town. Isaac kept checking their back trail, but no one seemed to be following. Either the marshal was making good on his promise to uphold the judge's decision, or the townspeople were too frightened of Isaac to pursue them. Either way, they were clear. As the sun began to set, Isaac led them off the main trail and into a small clearing beside a creek. They would camp here tonight and continue on to his cabin tomorrow. Katerina dismounted with a small groan of stiffness, and Isaac was beside her immediately, steadying her with a hand on her waist. "You all right? Just sore. It has been a few days since I moved much." She looked around at the clearing, at the way the evening light filtered through the leaves and the creek burbled over smooth stones. "This is beautiful. Wait until you see the upper elevations. This is just the foothills." While Isaac set up camp and built a fire, Katerina walked down to the creek and knelt beside it, cupping water to her face. He watched her from the corner of his eye, struck by how right she looked here, like she had always belonged in these wild places. They ate simple fare, jerky and hardtack and coffee strong enough to strip paint, then sat by the fire as full darkness fell. The sky above was a riot of stars, unpolluted by the lamps of civilization. "I never thanked you," Katerina said softly, "for everything you did. For protecting me, for speaking at the trial, for believing me. Do not need thanks." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him across the fire. "You put yourself at risk for a stranger. You called mob justice what it was, even though it would have been easier to walk away. And you testified to things that most people would rather deny, things about me that could have turned the crowd against you too." Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just did what was right. It was more than that, and you know it." She paused. "You feel it too, do not you, this connection between us?" "Yes. My grandmother told me stories about this. She called it finding your match, your magical counterpart. She said it happens rarely, maybe once in several generations. Two people whose gifts complement each other so perfectly that being near each other amplifies both. She said it was like lightning finding the right path to ground, that instant recognition of where you belong." Isaac looked up at her, the firelight dancing across her face. "Is that what this is?" "I think so. Your connection to the land, to nature, it is earth magic, grounded and stable and strong. Mine is more like water, flowing and adaptive and intuitive. Together we balance each other." She smiled slightly. "That is the theory anyway. I have never experienced it before, only heard the stories. Sounds like fate, maybe. Or maybe we make our own fate by choosing to follow what we know is true." She stood and walked around the fire to sit beside him. "I choose this. I choose you if you will have me." Isaac reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. She leaned into the touch, her eyes drifting closed. "Already chose you the moment I saw you in that wagon," he said. "Did not understand it then, but I do now. You are mine and I am yours. Simple as that." When he kissed her this time, there were no manacles between them, no cell walls or watching guards. Just the two of them under a vast sky, surrounded by wilderness, claiming each other with a certainty that defied logic but felt absolutely right. They made love that night on Isaac's bedroll beside the dying fire, slow and gentle because of her bruises, but with an intensity that left them both shaking. Isaac had been with women before, but never like this. Never with the sense that he was not just joining bodies but souls, that he was finding a part of himself he had not known was missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together while Katerina traced the scars on his chest and arms with gentle fingers. "These are from the war," she said. It was not a question, most of them. "I can feel the pain they carry, not the physical pain but the memories attached to them, all the fear and violence and loss." Her fingers settled over his heart. "You carry so much darkness in here, let me help you heal it. Some things do not heal. Everything heals eventually if you let it, if you have the right person helping you." She looked up at him. "I can see your light, remember, and it is not dark, Isaac. It is golden and warm and good. Whatever you did in the war, whatever you think you are, the truth is you have a pure heart. You just needed to find your way back to it." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. Maybe she was right. Maybe being with her, finally having someone who saw him clearly and did not turn away, maybe that was the healing he had been searching for all these years on the mountain. They reached Isaac's cabin late the next afternoon. It was a solid structure he had built himself, one large room with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace. Not fancy, but well made and positioned in a small valley that got morning sun and evening shade. A creek ran nearby, and the view of the surrounding mountains was spectacular. Katerina dismounted and stood looking at it all with wonder on her face. "It is perfect. Exactly what I would have imagined for you." Over the following weeks, they settled into a life together that felt both strange and completely natural. Isaac taught her the best places to hunt and fish, the trails that led to high meadows and hidden waterfalls. Katerina established a garden and began identifying the local plants, sorting them by their medicinal properties. She taught him things too. How to identify subtle signs of illness in animals they hunted, ensuring they only took the healthy ones. How to read weather patterns in the behavior of birds and insects, making his already impressive tracking skills even sharper. And slowly, carefully, she taught him to acknowledge his own gifts, to stop fighting against the magic that had always been part of him. "You are resisting," she said one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. "I can feel it, like you are holding yourself back from something, just cautious, spent too long denying all this to just suddenly embrace it. I understand, but you do not have to deny it anymore, not with me." She took his hand. "Try something. Close your eyes and just feel the mountain around us. Stop analyzing and thinking, just feel." Isaac did as she asked, though it felt foolish. But with his eyes closed and Katerina's hand in his, he let his awareness expand outward. And suddenly he could feel it, really feel it. The mountain was not just rock and trees and water. It was alive in a way he had always sensed but never fully acknowledged. He could feel its slow, patient heartbeat, its awareness of him as a welcome presence. And he could feel Katerina beside him, her light intertwining with his, creating something stronger than either alone. They were part of the mountain now, connected to it and to each other in ways that made them more than just two individuals. When he opened his eyes, she was smiling at him. "You felt it?" "Yeah, I felt it. This is who you are, Isaac, who we are together, not something to fear or deny, something to embrace." As summer turned to fall, their love deepened and their connection grew stronger. Isaac found himself laughing more, smiling more, the darkness that had haunted him since the war gradually lifting. Katerina bloomed in the mountain environment, her skills with healing expanding as she learned from the land itself. They made love often, sometimes with fierce passion, sometimes with tender slowness, but always with that sense of completeness that came from being with someone who truly understood you. Isaac loved the way she fit against him, the way she gasped his name when he touched her just right, the way she would trace patterns on his skin afterward while they talked in low voices about everything and nothing. One evening in October, as the first snow dusted the high peaks, Katerina told him she was pregnant. Isaac froze, his hands stilling on the pot he was washing. "Are you certain?" "Very certain. I have known for a week, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." She watched him carefully. "I know we have not talked about children. If you are not ready—" He crossed the cabin in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "Not ready, Katerina. I have never wanted anything more. A child with you, raised up here in these mountains, surrounded by beauty and love and magic. It is perfect." She relaxed against him, relief evident in every line of her body. "I was hoping you would say that. "You are mine," he said fiercely. "You and this child, my family. I will protect you both with everything I have. I know you will." The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows that kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. But Isaac had prepared well, and they had plenty of supplies. More than that, they had each other. They spent those long winter nights talking, making plans, imagining the future. Katerina taught him to read the patterns in flames the way her grandmother had taught her, to see visions in the fire that showed possible futures. Isaac taught her to shoot his rifle properly, insisting she know how to protect herself and their child when he was out checking trap lines. They talked about the baby constantly, what they would name it, what gifts it might have, how they would raise it. Isaac wanted to teach their child everything about the mountain, about living in harmony with nature. Katerina wanted to pass on her healing knowledge, her understanding of plants and remedies. "This child will be powerful," she said one night, her hand resting on her growing belly. "With both our gifts combined, they will be able to do amazing things. As long as they are happy and safe, that is all that matters," Isaac said, covering her hand with his. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of wildflowers and new life. Katerina's belly had grown round and full, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman in her final weeks of pregnancy. Isaac had become even more protective as her time drew near, hovering close whenever she moved around the cabin, insisting on doing all the heavy work. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding it came from love and fear of losing her. "I am a healer," she reminded him one afternoon as he carried yet another bucket of water he thought was too heavy for her. "I know what my body can handle. Still, rather be too careful than not careful enough." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "You are going to be an excellent father." Their son was born on a warm May evening as the sun set behind the western peaks. Katerina's labor was long but not overly difficult, and Isaac stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Isaac felt something shift in his chest. This was his son, his family. The life he had never thought he deserved after the war, laid out before him in the form of a tiny, wrinkled infant. They named him James after Isaac's father. James Flint, born in a mountain cabin far from civilization, already surrounded by magic and love. As Katerina recovered and they both learned the rhythms of life with an infant, Isaac marveled at how complete his life had become. A year ago he had been alone, convinced he would spend the rest of his days in isolation. Now he had a wife in all but legal name, a son, and a future that stretched out before him bright with possibility. "You ever regret it?" Katerina asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching James sleep in his cradle. "Taking me in, changing your whole life for someone you barely knew." Isaac pulled her closer against his side. "Not for 1 second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, you and James both. Even though I brought trouble to your door, even though we can never go back to St. Joe or anywhere in the area, especially because of that. You gave me a reason to live again, not just exist. You saw me, really saw me, and you did not turn away. That is worth more than any town or territory." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Isaac Flint. I love you too, Katerina Morgan." "Actually," she said, a smile in her voice, "I was thinking maybe Katerina Flint has a nice sound to it." He turned to look at her. "You want to get married, properly, if you do. I know we are already committed to each other in every way that matters, but it might be nice to make it official. And for James to have parents who share a name. Then we will do it. Ride down to the next town over, find a preacher. Make it legal. They did exactly that 2 weeks later when Katerina felt strong enough to travel and they could find someone to watch James for a few hours. The ceremony was simple, performed by a circuit preacher in a small settlement 50 miles from St. Joe. But standing there and making their vows official, Isaac felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was his wife, his family, his future. The years that followed were the happiest of Isaac's life. They raised James in the mountains, teaching him to track and hunt and identify plants. The boy showed signs of having both his parents' gifts, able to sense animals before they appeared and know which plants would help or harm. When James was 3, Katerina became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, who were as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. Sarah was quiet and contemplative, Emma bold and adventurous. Both had their mother's green eyes and their father's dark hair. The cabin became too small with 5 people, so Isaac built an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. He also built a small shelter where Katerina could prepare her medicines and treatments, as word had slowly spread, and people from distant settlements would occasionally make the trek to see her for healing. She never charged for her services, operating on trade and barter. A man whose child she saved from fever brought them a milk cow. A woman whose difficult birth she attended sent them chickens and seeds. Slowly, carefully, Katerina built a reputation as a healer without attracting the kind of dangerous attention that had nearly gotten her killed in St. Joe. Isaac continued to hunt and trap, providing for his family and occasionally guiding travelers through the mountains for extra money. But his main focus was always his family, protecting them and creating a life where they could all thrive. The children grew up wild and free, running through the mountains like young deer, learning to speak to the land the way their parents did. Isaac taught the boys who came to them for healing how to shoot and track, while Katerina taught the girls from distant farms about herbs and remedies. Their cabin became a gathering place, a haven in the wilderness where magic was acknowledged and celebrated rather than feared. Sometimes, lying in bed with Katerina sleeping beside him and the sounds of his children breathing softly in the loft, Isaac would think back to that August day in 1867 when a woman in chains had rolled into St. Joe. How he had stepped forward into her defense without understanding why. How that single decision had changed the entire trajectory of his life. She had been accused of being a witch. In a way, the accusation was true. She did have magic, real and undeniable magic, but it was not the evil sorcery the townspeople feared. It was the magic of seeing clearly, of healing, of understanding the patterns that connected all living things. And she had his magic too, just as he had hers. They fit together like 2 pieces of a puzzle, each making the other stronger and more complete. That was the real witchcraft, the real sorcery. Not curses or hexes, but love. Pure, transformative, transcendent love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Katerina rode up to the highest meadow on the mountain, leaving the children with a trusted friend for the night. They made camp beside a crystal-clear lake that reflected the stars like a mirror and spent the evening talking about everything they had built together. "You remember what you said to me in that jail cell?" Katerina asked, nestled against his chest as they lay on their bedroll looking up at the sky. "That you would not let me die, even if you had to break the law to prevent it. I remember. Would have done it too. I know. That was when I knew for certain that you were mine." That kind of certainty, that absolute commitment, it is rare. Most people go their whole lives never feeling that strongly about anything or anyone. I knew from the moment I saw you. Took me a while to understand what I knew, but it was there from the beginning. He tightened his arms around her. "You are my whole world, Katerina. You and the children. Everything good in my life started the day you came to town accused of being a witch." She laughed softly. "Strange how the worst day of my life turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. That is how magic works, I think. Turning darkness into light, despair into hope. You taught me that." They made love under the stars that night, slow and tender and full of the deep intimacy that came from 10 years of building a life together. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Katerina told him she was pregnant again. "Another one," Isaac said, but he was smiling. "We are going to need an even bigger cabin." "Then you will build one. That is what you do. You build things, create spaces where our family can grow and thrive." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Isaac Flint. Thank you for saving me all those years ago. You saved me too. I was dying up here in the mountains, slowly fading away from life. You brought me back." Their fourth child, another son they named Thomas, was born the following spring. He was quieter than James had been, more thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to see things beyond the normal range of vision. Katerina said he would be a powerful seer when he grew older, able to glimpse futures and read the currents of fate. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and milestones rather than calendar dates. James grew into a strong young man, nearly as tall as his father, and every bit as skilled in the mountains. The twins became talented healers under their mother's tutelage, and Thomas showed signs of gifts that went beyond even what Isaac and Katerina could fully understand. Other families had begun to settle in the surrounding mountains, drawn by stories of a place where those with gifts could live without fear. Isaac and Katerina found themselves at the center of a small community of people who understood that magic was real, that some people had abilities beyond the normal, and that this was something to celebrate rather than persecute. It was not a formal community, just a loose collection of families spread across the mountains, connected by mutual respect and shared understanding. But it was enough. It was safety and acceptance and the freedom to be who they truly were. On his 50th birthday, Isaac stood on the porch of his expanded cabin and looked out at the life he had built. His children were grown now. James married to a girl from one of the other mountain families, the twins courting young men who had come seeking healing and stayed for love. Thomas, at 16, was already being consulted by people from distant towns who had heard of his ability to see true. Katerina came out to stand beside him, her red hair now streaked with silver but her green eyes as bright and sharp as ever. She slipped her hand into his and leaned against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about? About how none of this should have been possible. A woman accused of witchcraft and a broken mountain man should not have been able to create this. But we did. We did," she agreed. "Because the magic was real. My magic, your magic, the magic between us. It was all real and it changed everything." Isaac turned to look at her, at the woman who had turned his life from survival into something worth living. "I would do it all again. Every single moment, even the scary parts. Even risking everything, especially those parts, because they led to this." He gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the life they had created together. "To you and me and our family, to a place where magic is not something to hide but something to honor, that is worth any risk." She reached up to cup his face, pulling him down for a kiss. After 23 years of marriage, the touch of her lips still sent electricity through his veins, still made his heart race like he was a young man falling in love for the first time. "You gave me everything," she whispered against his mouth. "A home, a family, a life beyond anything I dreamed possible when I was sitting in that jail cell waiting to die. You are my magic, Isaac Flint, the best magic I will ever know. And you are mine." They stood there on the porch as the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Their children's laughter drifted up from the valley below, where James was teaching his own young son to track. Smoke rose from chimneys scattered across the mountainside, marking other families who had found safety and community here. This was Isaac's kingdom, his legacy, not built on violence or conquest, but on love and acceptance, and the courage to acknowledge that magic was real. That some people had gifts beyond the normal. That connection and commitment could transform lives. He had been a broken soldier seeking isolation when Katerina came into his life in chains, accused of being a witch. She had been a terrified healer facing death for the crime of being different. Together they had created something neither could have built alone: a life, a family, a community, a future. And all of it started because Isaac Flint had looked at a woman in a wagon and felt his heart recognize its match. Because he had been brave enough to step forward when everyone else stepped back. Because he had believed in magic, even when he did not want to call it that. The mountain breeze picked up, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Isaac pulled Katerina closer, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, steady and strong and constant. This was his magic, right here. This woman, this life, this love that had endured through challenges and triumphs, through fear and joy, through every season and year. She had come to town accused of being a witch, and he had told the world that magic was real, because she had his and he had hers. It was the truest thing he had ever spoken, and it would remain true until his last breath. As darkness settled over the mountains and stars began to appear in the vast sky above, Isaac and Katerina went inside to the warmth of their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight, they had this perfect peace, this absolute certainty that they had built something lasting and true. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to their love story, guardian of their family. And somewhere in the valleys below, other families settled in for the night, grateful for the sanctuary these mountains provided. Grateful for the couple who had proven that magic was not something to fear, but something to celebrate. Isaac Flint and Katerina Morgan Flint had changed the world, one heart at a time, one family at a time, one act of courage at a time. And their legacy would endure long after they were gone, carried on by their children and grandchildren, by everyone who had found safety and acceptance in these mountains. This was their story. This was their magic, and it was real.